For days, the primary focus of the war between Ukraine and Russia had shifted toward the southern sectors of the front. However, Kyiv recently altered its strategy and redirected its efforts toward Pokrovsk in Donetsk Oblast, a city with the potential to influence the entire course of the war. In this heavily fortified city, strengthened since 2014 and positioned under the shadow of Russian occupation pressure, Ukraine's most elite paratrooper units emerged as the central force on the battlefield. Their mission was to prevent Putin from fully capturing the fortress belt through Pokrovsk. If Russian forces succeeded in seizing the historic defensive line formed by Sloviansk, Druskivka, and Kostiantinivka, they would gain an opportunity to push further toward Dnipro. In fact, as part of this broader occupation strategy, the Kremlin had deployed approximately 99,000 troops around Pokrovsk in recent months. Russian mechanized formations, armored brigades, and infantry units maintained a relentless campaign to block Ukrainian forces from entering the city. The enormous concentration of Russian military personnel around Pokrovsk was also officially confirmed by the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrsky. In other words, the task facing Ukraine's paratrooper units was extraordinarily difficult. Breaking through occupation forces that had effectively surrounded the city from every direction seemed almost dependent on a miracle. The Russian military appeared to be placing immense confidence in its overwhelming superiority in manpower and equipment across the region. As a natural consequence of this confidence, Russian planners concentrated their attention on continued advances along the southern and eastern axes rather than securing rear positions around Pokrovsk. Yet, Ukraine's air assault units and supporting formations had been quietly and meticulously studying Russian military activity in the city for a long time. One by one, they identified the locations of FPV drone systems that were placing intense pressure on Ukrainian positions, while remaining carefully concealed within civilian buildings. In particular, Ukraine's electronic warfare and military intelligence units mapped this hidden network of Russian drone facilities through sophisticated signal tracking and highly accurate geolocation methods. Then came Kyiv's anticipated strategic move, striking these critical enemy launch points deep within the city itself. At that moment, everything was prepared for Ukraine's paratrooper units to shatter the occupation force's operational advantage in Pokrovsk. At this crucial stage, the Ukrainian General Staff committed the 7th Air Assault Corps, one of its most elite airborne formations, alongside the 4th Ranger Regiment, a unit specializing in special operations. This decision became one of the most significant moves made in Pokrovsk. In recent weeks, both formations targeted 6 separate Russian drone launch sites that had been carefully hidden within the city's civilian infrastructure. According to reports, Russian forces had established these launch points near a library, inside a household goods store, and around a cafe in the city center to avoid detection and remain effectively camouflaged. Even a damaged residential house in a civilian neighborhood had been converted into a primary launch platform for these systems. More importantly, the unmanned systems concealed at these locations were far from ordinary. Most of them were Monia-type or similar VTOL and hybrid unmanned aerial systems. These platforms could take off and land vertically from narrow civilian areas, apartment courtyards, and private gardens without requiring traditional launch infrastructure. Among them were satellite-linked variants such as the Molnia 2R, equipped with electronic warfare resistance and capable of functioning as communication repeaters. After months of painstaking intelligence work, Ukraine's paratrooper units finally initiated the strike operation against these complex targets on June 13th. The operation unfolded within seconds as fixed-wing Ukrainian attack drones were guided with exceptional precision to exact coordinates. The units employed highly disciplined tactics designed to destroy only designated Russian military assets while avoiding unnecessary damage to civilian structures. By the end of the day, all 6 identified drone launch and recovery sites had been successfully eliminated without a single operational loss. The coordination between advanced military technology and battlefield discipline demonstrated by Ukraine's air assault forces during this mission was remarkable. Yet what Russia lost in Pokrovsk after the operation was even more significant. First and foremost, the occupation forces' aerial reconnaissance and strike capabilities, which had continuously pressured Ukrainian logistics routes and frontline positions, were severely degraded. These VTOL drones provided Russian forces with invaluable tactical flexibility because they could be launched from narrow civilian locations. Using these systems, Putin's military had been able to penetrate deep behind Ukrainian defensive lines and target supply convoys carrying vital ammunition. The destruction of these facilities significantly reduced Russia's ability to gather real-time intelligence and rapidly inflict attritional damage across the city. For Putin, this new reality became the clearest and most painful reminder that even in a city he considered firmly under control, Russian forces were not truly safe. Being struck so effectively far behind the front line delivered a serious psychological blow to occupation commanders and frontline troops alike. Ukraine, meanwhile, gained valuable breathing space on the battlefield following this bold and successful operation. The temporary disruption of the Russian drone threat around Pokrovsk allowed Ukrainian infantry to remain safer in their trenches while reducing pressure on critical logistics routes. Furthermore, executing such a precise operation in the very heart of occupied territory once again demonstrated the Ukrainian military's superiority in electronic warfare and intelligence-driven operations. However, everything visible on the battlefield represented only the surface of a much larger strategic reality. Behind these seemingly limited and highly specific operations were consequences capable of influencing the broader balance of power across the region. Since the beginning of the war, Pokrovsk has served as one of the most important and busiest logistical hubs in eastern Ukraine. Positioned at the intersection of major rail lines and highways supporting the Eastern Front, the city functions as a strategic artery. Ukraine's targeted operations against Russian drone facilities directly affect the security of these critical supply routes. Russian forces have long sought control of major highways, such as the T-0504 and T-0508, in an effort to strangle Ukraine's supply network. In particular, the T-0504 route, supporting the Kramatorsk and Sloviansk axis, became a focal point of operations in recent months and emerged as a primary Russian objective. This route stretches from Pokrovsk to Kostiantynivka and directly supports Ukrainian defensive positions near Chasiv Yar. The west-east M04 and E50 highways form another major artery through which heavy armored reinforcements enter the city from the Dnipro and Pavlohrad directions. Beyond the road network, rail resupply through Pokrovsk station sits at the center of this complex logistical system. In early 2025, Russian forces succeeded in severing the critical rail connection between Dnipro and Pokrovsk, significantly slowing Ukraine's logistical tempo. To overcome this severe bottleneck, the Ukrainian military increasingly relied on unmanned robotic transport systems, alternative muddy back roads, and nighttime convoys operating beyond the reach of thermal surveillance. Through this latest air assault operation in Pokrovsk, Ukraine delivered a major blow to Russia's efforts to dominate these supply corridors. In response, Ukrainian forces transformed the TO-508 highway between Pokrovsk and Hryshyn into a defensive kill zone, where Russian assault groups found movement nearly impossible. According to data provided by drone operators from Ukraine's 7th Corps, approximately 100 Russian soldiers were neutralized along just a 2-kilometer section of this road over the past 50 days. Russian advance units, attempting to move through this exposed corridor, deprived of natural cover, were eliminated almost immediately after entering Ukraine's carefully constructed aerial surveillance and strike network. Through actions like these, Ukrainian forces managed to keep the critical lifeline used by logistics convoys carrying ammunition to the front continuously open and significantly safer. In reality, Ukraine's strategic posture around Pokrovsk did not begin with the June 13th operation that destroyed 6 Russian drone bases. On June 5th, another highly significant operation had already been successfully executed in the city center. During that mission, Ukrainian forces carried out a precise strike against a sophisticated Molniya-type Russian drone launch facility positioned in the heart of Pokrovsk. That earlier operation had already disrupted Russian reconnaissance capabilities and effectively signaled the approach of a much larger campaign. In fact, the foundations of the tactical successes now unfolding around Pokrovsk had been carefully laid throughout May. During that period, Ukrainian units conducted relentless counter-battery operations against Russian artillery systems and concealed drone launch points day and night. Simultaneously, next-generation drone teams working alongside elite formations continuously hunted Russian logistics convoys, and concentrations of armored personnel. Through these rear-area operations, Ukraine achieved an extraordinary milestone by conducting a record number of strikes against Russian targets within a single day. In other words, the major June 13th strike was not an isolated flash of success, but the culmination of a patient, systematic, and highly organized attritional campaign that had been developing for months. Meanwhile, following this succession of tactical setbacks and infrastructure losses, the Russian military gradually began losing the momentum that had fueled its occupation effort around Pokrovsk. While Russia attempted to bombard Ukrainian positions with massive KAB and FAB glide bombs and pursued a relentless attrition-based strategy on the ground, its progress remained painfully slow. Applying its doctrine of battlefield denial with full force, Russia sought to sever logistics routes through sheer pressure. Yet its advances came only meter by meter. Even around Pokrovsk and its surrounding areas alone, Putin's forces suffered enormous military losses that were increasingly difficult to replace. During this grinding phase of warfare, where Russia was reportedly losing more than 1,000 soldiers per day on average, casualty ratios in some sectors reportedly reached an astonishing 10-to-1 advantage for Ukraine. In response, Ukrainian headquarters moved quickly to expand these hard-won gains into a broader operational framework. To accomplish this, Ukraine established an exceptionally resilient, flexible, and deeply layered military structure around the city. Within the region, not only the 7th Air Assault Corps, but also numerous experienced and combat-proven ground brigades operated side by side on a rotational basis. For example, the 42nd Separate Mechanized Brigade constructed a highly coordinated defensive line around the urban area, creating a steel barrier against Russian infiltration attempts. On the northern and western flanks, the 155th Separate Mechanized Brigade remained on constant alert, ready to repel enemy advances with powerful artillery support. The most difficult urban combat within the shattered ruins of the city and surrounding districts was carried out with remarkable resilience by the 68th Separate Jaeger Brigade. In addition, the 3rd Spartan Operational Brigade of the National Guard played a critical role in destroying Russian platoon-sized assault groups attempting to infiltrate using motorcycles and light off-road vehicles before they could reach Ukrainian positions. The legendary 25th Air Assault Brigade, operating independently throughout the region, conducted sudden raids and infiltration missions behind enemy lines with extraordinary effectiveness. At the same time, the renowned 93rd Mechanized Brigade made battlefield conditions increasingly difficult for Russian forces through counter-battery fire designed to protect logistics routes and suppress enemy artillery on the western flank. Supporting this defensive shield was the artillery strength of the 152nd Brigade, which relentlessly targeted Russian unmanned aerial vehicle infrastructure whenever opportunities emerged. Together, all of these military formations are fighting to permanently end Russia's ambition of reaching the fortress belt and advancing toward the Dnipropetrovsk region. This evolving defensive structure is not based solely on static trench warfare. Instead, it revolves around a highly mobile, technology-driven attritional strategy. Through this modern tactical model, the defensive line has been divided into 3 powerful layers: mechanized brigades and minefields at the forward edge, dense drone kill zones in the middle layer, and long-range deep strike capabilities in the rear. Traditional defensive systems have been integrated with fiber-optic drone networks and rapid reaction forces, ensuring that every Russian advance comes at an enormous cost. So what comes next for Pokrovsk? In the months ahead, it appears increasingly likely that the battle around the city will evolve into an even more sophisticated contest of electronic warfare and unmanned systems. Although Russia continues launching wave-style assaults supported by its vast manpower reserves, the steady destruction of key military infrastructure is increasingly restricting its ability to advance. Ukraine's data-driven precision strike doctrine is demonstrating to militaries around the world how even extremely large armies can be transformed into blind and ineffective forces when deprived of intelligence and technological advantages. In the coming months, Ukraine is expected to intensify these strategic infiltration and air assault operations not only around Pokrovsk, but across the entire Eastern Front. In conclusion, this strategic drone-based operation, carried out by Ukrainian paratroopers in Pokrovsk, created a major turning point in the war, one that may appear small at first glance, but whose consequences continue to spread outward in waves. The distinction between possessing numerical superiority and achieving genuine battlefield dominance through intelligence and technology has once again become unmistakably clear. The precise neutralization of these hidden Russian drone threats, carefully concealed among civilian structures and eliminated without civilian casualties, is helping to define a new chapter in 21st century warfare. In other words, the Pokrovsk front is providing a powerful real-world demonstration of how patience, accurate intelligence, effective tactics, and perfectly timed decisions can determine outcomes on the modern battlefield. So, what do you think about this development? Will Ukraine's new generation defensive doctrine, built around unmanned systems and elite air assault forces, prove sufficient to halt Russia's traditional war machine in the long run? And how will the ability to conduct such flawless, intelligence-driven operations deep behind enemy lines shape the future direction of this war in the coming months? We look forward to reading your thoughts in the comments.